You ever wanted to grow your own garlic? I'm going to show you exactly how to do that in this video, all the way from start to harvest. So stick around. Hey guys, welcome back to another Slightly Rednecked video. Again, my name's Chris. If you're not familiar with this channel, I help you to produce your own meat, eggs, and vegetables from your backyard, your balcony, your deck, your garage, or heck, even a spare room in your house if that's the way you want to do it. And I've long been requested to do a video on growing garlic, so that's what we're doing. We're talking about growing your own garlic. Now, this is a fairly long process, so this video is going to take place over almost a year before we actually finish harvesting it, but I'm going to cut it all down, just one video as you're watching right now. First things I want to talk about is, let's talk about your soil prep first of all. Garlic's incredibly hardy, very easy to grow, so you don't really need to do a whole lot to your soil. You know, I would throw some compost over it, but you don't really need to worry about, heavily amending your soil. It will grow in very poor soil. It's, like I said, incredibly hardy. It's a lot like onions. They grow in just about anything. And think of it, I haven't done much to these beds. You can see I've got them covered with some landscape fabric to keep the weeds down. The bed's underneath here between these two pieces of rebar right here goes down this way. And what I've thrown on here is I've thrown some rabbit manure and some compost on here, but again, you don't really need to do a whole lot. You could pretty much just turn the soil over and then plant right into it, and you're going to be just fine with garlic. You don't need to add a whole lot of anything to it. Now, I will say it's very important that you top mulch it with something. I've got the landscape fabric, but if you don't have that, put straw around it, put wood chips around it, something like that to keep the weeds down, because if you don't cover the ground, nature will cover it with weeds. So you do need a top mulch of some kind. Straw works perfectly fine, and it's a very cheap alternative to that. Wait till your plants sprout though and get about that tall before you mulch around them. You can mulch and just leave a hole about that big for the plant to start growing up through. If you mulch over the top of them before they sprout, then they're not going to grow either. So keep that in mind. Okay, as far as what you're looking for to grow garlic, basically just garlic cloves. Each one of these garlic cloves, and that's all these are, is just cloves. Took a head of garlic and busted it apart. Each one of these will produce a brand new garlic plant. Now, you can get these from just about anywhere. You can order garlic online for planting specifically for that, or you can just go to a farmer's market and get some garlic in a local area, something that's grown locally. I would not go to a supermarket and get garlic and plant that. Most of that stuff's from overseas. It's just not necessarily the best for growing at home. But anything at your local farmers markets, any of that kind of stuff, should be just fine for growing your garlic. And then once you get started, you'll never need to buy garlic again, because you'll save the cloves for from the harvest, and that's your next year's garlic crop, if that makes sense. So very easy process to plant this stuff. Now you're gonna let me find my shovel here. There we go. Get some gloves on because I don't want to get my hands too awful dirty. You're going to space this out about 4 inches apart, and then space your rows about 12 inches apart. So I can go 4 inches apart this way, 12 inches apart side by side. And I like to offset my rows just a little bit, so I might put one here, and then 12 inches over I'll put one here, if that kind of makes sense. Offset them so it's not a straight line across. I'll have a row here, and then one down the middle that's offset just a little bit, if I have enough garlic to go that far. We'll see. So I'm going to start right here in the bottom of this bed, and I'm just going to punch a hole through my landscape fabric. And of course, if you don't have landscape fabric, you don't need to worry about it. You only need to plant these about 1 inch deep, so you don't need to dig a very big hole. When you plant the garlic clove, you make sure that you go with the root end down, the pointy end up, and you want it facing pretty much straight up. If you put it to the side like this, it's still going to grow, but you're going to get a weird bulb in the end. You're not going to get a nice bulb. And then you just push it into the ground and cover it up with some soil, and that's it. That is all we got to do to plant the garlic. It is planted. So I'm going to go ahead and plant out a few of these and get one more in here and bring you in just a little bit closer so you can kind of see what I'm doing here. All right, so again, I've got a hole right here. I don't really need to dig it out because my soil's pretty loose right here. But I'm going to take the garlic clove, and it's going to go in just like this. Root end down, pointy end straight up. And just about 1 inch down in the dirt, and cover it up with some soil. And that's about all there is to getting it planted. So I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of this bed planted out, and then we'll come back and talk about a few more things before we get on to the next step. All right, so I got this bed all planted out. You would want to water it if it's dry, but it's actually raining right now, or just off and on raining, so I'm not going to have to worry about watering it. And that's really about it. We're going to just let it grow at this point here. Now, I'll be back as soon as it starts sprouting out. I'll tell you the next steps, and we'll go from there in the rest of this video. But before we close out this little section right here of the video, I do want to talk about when to plant your garlic. It's really best to plant it in the fall, probably about 4 weeks before your average first frost date. And just look that up if you don't know what that is in your region. Go into Google, type in average first frost date for whatever city you live in, and it will tell you what your average first frost date is. I'm a little bit late getting this into the ground. Our average first frost date is October 15th. This is October 6th today, so I'm pretty close. I'm cutting it pretty close, but it's been unseasonably warm. I don't think we're going to get that frost this early, so I think I'm fine. And even if you don't get it in that early, like I said, garlic is incredibly hardy. You may not see anything out of it until spring, and then all of a sudden it just shoots up. It's one of the first things to sprout in early spring. So again, not much else to do at this point right here. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, I guess, to show the next step whenever this stuff starts sprouting up. And we'll get all the way through the harvesting season with this video. All right, well, it's been just a couple of weeks since these went in the ground, and they are already sprouting. Hopefully you can see this on camera. About, I don't know, 3 inches tall, most of them. Some of them a little bit taller, some of them a little bit shorter, but this is exactly what we want to see. So it takes, like I said, about 3 weeks for these to get to this size right here to sprout, and they go incredibly fast once they sprout. Winter is coming. We're already past our first frost date. We haven't really had a hard freeze just yet, but this is exactly where you want them to be before winter really sets in. So it's really best to get these planted in the ground 6 weeks roughly before your first frost date is expected. Probably 4 weeks would be more like it. 4 to 6 weeks, somewhere right around in there before your first frost date is expected. And that's it. That's all we got to do for wintertime. There's not really any other kind of preparation you got to do. If your ground is not covered, like mine's covered with a weed fabric right here, if it's not, I would mulch and just mulch around this stuff. You can mulch right up to the stem. It's not going to hurt it at all. Mulch it with some, dead crushed up leaves, some wood chips, some straw, whatever you want to mulch with, it doesn't matter. But do cover the ground. That will protect the ground a little bit, keep weeds from sprouting up in it as much, and keep the moisture levels in it, keep it from drying out nearly as much. But that's it. These guys are ready to go through winter. Don't worry about it when the snow comes, when the cold weather comes, it's going to be fine. They are incredibly hardy. They will probably die back just a little bit, but they are established now. So they will shoot back up early spring. So there's not really anything else we have to do. We're just going to wait for spring and wait for them to come back up in spring, and then we'll pick back up and we'll go from there. All right, so it is early spring here in southwest Missouri. We had a pretty cold winter, but the garlic never died back really. It didn't grow much, but as soon as spring started hitting, boy, it just takes off. And I haven't done anything with this garlic. I mean, I put it in the ground, that's it. So it's growing great. That's all you need to do. Garlic's super easy to grow. Don't worry about protecting it in the wintertime. Even if we get tons of snow on it or whatever, this stuff just does fine. That's one of the reasons we start it so early in the year, in the late fall, to let it get established before winter hits. And then once winter hits, it might die back a little bit, but don't stress about that. As soon as the ground warms up, it's going to take off and it's going to do just great. So, really not much else to do with this garlic. We're just going to wait until it'll probably be a couple more months before it's really ready to harvest. You'll know it's ready to harvest. I'll come back and show that, but when it starts, when the leaves start to die and start to fall over, that means it's ready to harvest. It'll probably be, like I said, late summer before it's ready at all. All right, so it's early June here in southwest Missouri. The garlic's doing great. It's starting to send up these scapes here is what these are called. Looks kind of like a seed pod here. Now the common wisdom is to go ahead and snap these off or trim them off so the energy can go to growing the bulbs instead of growing the seed pods. So you can sometimes just break them off, but I like to use a pair of scissors and just kind of snip them off. Just snip them off close to the base or to where it comes out of the plant. And there we go. That's it. Now you can eat these. These may be a little bit big. I'll let them go just a little bit long, but let me take you back to the back. I'll show you some that are just a little bit smaller and probably a little bit more ideal for cooking. But basically you just chop them up like you would like a scallion, a green onion, something like that. Throw it in your flavor. It's got a real mild garlic kind of flavor to it. So, but that's all we have to do at this point. Here's another one right here. And again, I haven't been Haven't been watering these or anything. I'm just kind of letting the rain take care of them. There's really nothing you have to do. Garlic is incredibly hardy, incredibly sturdy. It's going to take care of itself. So I'm going to go ahead and snip off all these scapes that are coming up here, and that's pretty much all there is to do at this point. We're just going to wait for these things to finish growing and tell us when they're ready to harvest, and I'll come back when it's time for that. Let me show you a couple of these other scapes here that are just a little bit smaller, a little bit more ideal. All right, so here's a garlic plant that's got just a very small scape on it, and this is the part that we're talking about right here. Now this one is ideal. These you don't even need a pair of scissors. You can just snip them right off. I'll get in the camera here so you can see what I'm talking about. But again, this can be diced up, added to stir fries, added to most of your food. It's got a great flavor, just a mild garlic kind of flavor to it, and works fantastic. It's ideal to get these as they're small. There's another one right over here. I don't know if you can see that on camera or not, but there it is right there. Try to get that on camera. Having a hard time focusing on the camera and on the garlic at the same time. So anyway, again, that's all we're gonna do at this stage right here, and then we're just gonna let them continue to grow. They'll tell us when they're ready to harvest. I got a couple of them that are kind of leaning over a little bit. It's not really a big concern. I'm just gonna leave them the way that they are. It's not gonna hurt anything at all. All right, so it's early July. Actually, today is the 4th of July. This garlic is ready to harvest. It's actually past harvest. I let it go a little bit too long. I should have harvested a little bit sooner. The way you're gonna tell if your garlic is ready to harvest is when these leaves start turning brown and start dying off. These are a little bit past where I like to harvest them. I should have done it a couple of weeks ago, but I got busy. I had so much going on, just didn't have time. That's okay, garlic's pretty forgiving. Some of these right here that are completely brown, like this one, they may not turn out the best. We're gonna dig them up. I'm gonna show you what I mean by that. But some of these like this that still have some green tops on them, you wanna harvest them really whenever there's about, I don't know, 1/3 to 1/2 of the leaves have turned brown. So you can see again, these have gone just a little bit past where I need them. But that's okay, these are gonna be okay, and for the most part, they're gonna be fine. And some of the other ones I'll still be able to use. Let me bring you in close and I'll show you how we go about harvesting these. All right, so to harvest this garlic, the last thing you want to do is just grab it and yank it out of the ground. We actually need to kind of dig it up. Now I've got some weed fabric here, so I'm gonna move this weed fabric out of the way. And then, I mean, you might be able to dig with your hands a little bit. I've got a little bit of shovel here if I need to, but what I want to do is kind of loosen up this dirt around the base of that bulb and see if I can get underneath it. I may have to actually use a shovel. I want to dig around the edges. I don't want to actually damage the bulb itself whenever I dig it up. That'll make it store better. So here we go. There is a garlic bulb. And this one actually looks pretty good considering all the leaves died off. What you will notice is it doesn't have as much of a protective layer as some of these others when I get them out of the ground. I'll show you what I mean by that. All right, so there's my second one out of the ground. This may be hard to see on camera, but you might be able to tell this has got just a little bit of a thicker kind of protective membrane around the bulb itself, and this one's starting to flake off a little bit more, starting to die back. It's not that big of a deal. They're still looking pretty good. If you let them go too long, let me get one of these other ones over here. Maybe this will be a better example. What will happen is the garlic bulbs will start to separate in the ground, and this one may have already done that. It's looking pretty, well, actually, no, that one looks pretty good too. But what'll happen is they'll start to break apart and separate in the ground, which is fine. It's still okay to use at that point. It just doesn't store as well. So you really want to get them out of the ground before they get to that point. Let me go ahead and get the rest of these up, and then we'll come back and tell you a little bit more about how to store them, how to cure them, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so as I'm digging these up, here's a good example of one. This one's not usable at all anymore. This one was probably one of the first ones that went brown, and it's just kind of, hopefully you can see it, kind of turned to mush. Just not good. It started to rot, started to go bad. This has failed, not good. Should have got out of the ground a little bit earlier. And here's one more. This isn't bad, this is still usable, but it's not gonna store very well because it's starting to, the peeling, the protective peeling on the cloves is starting to come apart. So that one's not gonna store very well. That's okay. I mean, it's just 1, 2 out of all of them I've harvested so far. But again, that's why you want to get them out of the ground just a little bit earlier. All right, so got the garlic harvested. Got a pretty decent little harvest out of it. this probably will last me not quite all year long. I need to grow a little bit more next year, but what I'll do is I'll go ahead and cure this stuff, and then I'll pick out the biggest ones, the best looking garlic, and those will be the ones that I'll use to start next year's harvest. And I'll plant those again, you know, mid-September, give them time to get started before the freeze hits in mid-October. At this point, you don't want to wash these off. You can brush the dirt off of them, but don't wash them off. You can trim the roots off if you want to, take a pair of scissors and just snip them off, but you don't want to wash them. You want them to be as dry as possible. And what I would do is take them and hang them in bundles of 3 or 4, you know, something like this. If I can get them apart, there we go. And hang them up in an area that is protected from direct sunlight, but gets good airflow and is good and dry. So in a garage, in a, you know, under your rafters of your house, something like that, where they're not going to get rained on, but they're not going to have direct sun either. And let them sit until they're dry. Now, depending on where you live and how arid your climate is, that may take, you know, a week or 2, or it may take a month before they dry out completely. Once they're dry, then you can go ahead and snip the cloves off of the stems. You can wash them off a little bit. You can store them however you want to store them. Again, make sure they're dry before you go putting them in a closed container or anything like that. But these will keep once they're cured for, you know, 8, 9, 10 months, maybe all year long, maybe a whole full year. So you've got quite a bit of garlic. You can use this throughout the year. So anyway, that's about all there is to growing garlic. It's one of the easiest crops in the world to grow. Again, what I'll do is I'll just pick out the ones that I think are the absolute best. I'll break those apart. I'll use those cloves to start my garlic for next year. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you learned something. Thank you so much for watching. As always, God bless.